I'm so thrilled about the data for the ADAURA study, which is being presented at ASCO this year, albeit virtually. But it is a plenary talk, and certainly worthy of that in that it's probably the first trial in non-small cell lung cancer that's using a targeted agent, in this case osimertinib, an EGFR TKI selective oral agent in patients after resection of tumors with stage 1, 2, or 3A disease. Now, as we all know, lung cancer has become a disease that is best treated in a multimodality way with surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. But even after all that, patients with stage 1 disease, about a quarter to a half will recur. Stage 2, slightly more than that, about 2/3. And for patients with stage 3, even more. So recurrence is quite high in lung cancer. Now, we know that patients have genetic mutations. In the US, about 10 to 15% of patients have epidermal growth factor receptor mutations. And in Asia, it can be as high as 20 to 30%. So if we remember that lung cancer affects several million people in the world each year, there are a large number of patients who will have tumors that are cut out, who have EGFR mutations. So the question is, why not do adjuvant therapy with these oral molecules? So that's where ADAURA comes in. It builds on the fact that FLAURA showed that osimertinib was superior to gefitinib or erlotinib in the metastatic setting, and it was well tolerated. And because of its tolerability profile, the feeling was that this drug could be taken for long periods of time. So this study was planned to give the drug for 3 years. ADAURA basically took patients, multinational study, Asia, US, about 2/3 of the patients went on in Asia, a third in the US. Patients basically received surgery. To be eligible, they had to have stage 1, 2, or 3A disease. They had to have an EGFR mutation, either exon 19 deletion or L858R. They had to have good performance status 0 to 1. They were all scanned so that we know whether or not they had brain disease. They could not have any brain metastases. And then they were randomized either before or after they received adjuvant chemotherapy. The patient and the physician could decide if they wanted to receive adjuvant therapy. As you can imagine, most of the patients with stage 2 and 3 disease did get adjuvant platinum-based chemotherapy. Most of those with stage 1 disease did not. Now, after a period of time, either 12 weeks if they had no adjuvant therapy, or 26 weeks if they had adjuvant therapy, they were randomized within that period to either osimertinib 80 milligrams daily or a placebo. Over 680 patients were accrued to this trial, and the primary endpoint was disease-free survival. What I presented here at ASCO was the disease-free survival result, and it was extraordinary. We had planned for a result with a hazard ratio of 0.7, a 30% improvement. In fact, there was no plan this year to even analyze the results. There was a planned Data Safety Monitoring Committee meeting to look at the safety of this trial. And at that safety meeting, the committee decided they needed to look at the efficacy because they had seen a few signs that the trial was looking quite positive. Well, it certainly was. The hazard ratio in the group of patients who, in the 2 and 3A patients, which was the primary analysis group, was 0.17 with a highly statistically significant p-value. What does that mean? That means it was an 83% decrease in the chance of disease-free recurrence in those patients who got the osimertinib versus the placebo. And then when this was looked at, adding in the stage 1 patients, it was about a third stage 1, a third stage 2, and a third stage 3. When you added in the stage 1 patients, what did you find? You found that the hazard ratio went up just a little bit, 0.21. Highly statistically significant, meaning 79% improvement. Now, it's still somewhat early in this trial. The trial is only mature, into about a third of where it would be when it's finally analyzed. But in this analysis, these results are just better than we could ever expect. It's too early to really say much about survival, but as far as disease-free survival, these patients just had tremendous results when they were on the osimertinib, on the EGFR inhibitor. Interestingly, when we looked at toxicity, It was quite mild, consistent with what's been seen with these EGFR tyrosine kinase inhibitors. No patients died from interstitial lung disease. Any that was seen, there were just a few of them, and they were all quite early. The main side effects were rash and diarrhea, all early grade. So bottom line, we have a drug, well-tolerated, these great effects on disease-free survival, both in the primary analysis population, stage 2 and 3, and in the population that also includes stage 1. Whether or not the patient received chemotherapy in this first look at the analysis did not seem to make a difference. So it worked irregardless of whether the patient had adjuvant chemotherapy. And, we're quite excited. There's more to come. I think in the future, we'll have to ask, where do the patients recur? Was it local or distant? If it was distant, we know that patients with lung cancer die of metastases. So the question is going to be, where were those metastases and what morbidity to the patient? I would predict that we'll see that patients did well for longer and felt better because they did not have this recurrence of disease to other parts of their body. We also have a very careful quality of life analysis. We're also going to look at dose delivery as well as subsequent therapies. But bottom line, here's a trial, adjuvant therapy with a targeted agent, great results. And it's very humbling for me. I've been working in the field for over 25 years. In fact, with my mentors, Wan Ki-hang, John Mendelsohn, I remember doing the first trials of EGFR inhibitors, then drugs ZD1839 and OSI 774. They became erlotinib and gefitinib, that many years ago. We used these drugs for 4, 5, 6 years before EGFR mutations were defined. Then EGFR mutations were defined, and now we're using these drugs in specific places, and now in the adjuvant setting. And this reminds me a lot like the story with Herceptin in breast cancer in 2005, bringing the best drugs to the earliest stage of disease. The late Josh Fidler, who just passed away earlier this month, taught us that patients with lung cancer die of metastases. And the idea is that you use your best drugs early on and prevent metastases from developing. So I think that this is a very important trial for lung cancer patients. It means that we can hopefully, once approved, if approved, use these drugs to change our practice. And then, of course, it sets the paradigm for the future, where all the targeted pathways that are being drugged now in lung cancer could potentially be used as targets in the earlier stage setting. So it really is a pleasure on behalf of all my co-authors from Japan, China, Europe, across the United States, all the patients who went on the trial in all the countries around the world, and of course the amazing team at AstraZeneca who helped and coordinated this study. It's very nice to see these data being presented on the virtual podium here at ASCO.